You're not alone. Trinity Helix AI. Trinity AI Legal. Trinity AI Support. Trinity AI SME. Trinity AI Data and Analytics. Our mission is 0 to 80.
Trinity Helix, just on episode 8 of our 10 parts investigative report into the actual history of the Online Safety Act and child grooming gangs and a lot of other things that you can imagine. And in episode 8 we're going to look at the really shocking application, or not application, of this very dodgy ideology, I think you call, which is victim belief, which was set up in, well, the first concept of it, which we were all on board for, which is about treating rape victims with much more compassion. Certainly, there were some of the old, 70s things lying around, not so much now. But but I don't think anyone was prepared for the idea of victim belief, which episode 8 will go into some detail. Basically, it means that, the state wants to understand, wants to work out what was said in a private conversation when it doesn't have all the facts, wants a sort of a methodology to do that when, quite frankly, there just isn't one. And we end up with victim belief. So, and it's beyond belief. So, and not only that, it's extremely dodgy, and no one really believes in it. And I suppose the people that are promoting it most believe in it least, because they were actually denying, they were both enforcing it and denying it with equal discipline at the same time.
Sources call it the scandal of selective justice.
Yeah, and what's really...
British state Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into a stack of material claiming the British state operates, well, not one, but two, entirely contradictory justice systems. The sources call it the scandal of selective justice.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is the core argument. It's not just saying there were failures. It's arguing the very principle of victim belief is being applied selectively.
Selectively? How so?
Well, the claim is it's used, perhaps deliberately, as a tool for institutional self-preservation.
Yeah.
Controlling the narrative.
Right. So we're connecting two huge threads today. These historic failures.
In other words, even the people who architected it didn't really believe it.
Particularly around systemic child abuse, and then the sort of ideological engine driving new laws like online safety stuff.
Exactly.
And the big question our sources really push is why? Why did the system fail to act when it seems the warnings were there, and why was it so systematic?
To get our heads around that contradiction, we really have to look at these two opposing poles. Poles of justice operating at the same time, often over the very same decade.
Okay, let's start with the first pole then. One source calls it the lost decade. Systematic disbelief. This is about the organized grooming gangs. Failures later sort of validated by things like the Casey report.
Right.
The sources detail how victims, and these were overwhelmingly children in state care, sometimes literally wards of the state, they were just dismissed.
Systematically. Yeah.
Labeled child prostitutes in official notes. Their testimony basically ignored, thrown out.
And this wasn't, just passive oversight. It wasn't an accident. The argument is this was denial as an active act. Institutional self-defense.
Active denial.
Because
believing those specific victims, those children in care, would have forced the state to admit its own role, its culpability in what the sources call the care to exploitation pipeline.
The idea that the care system itself was feeding the abuse.
In some cases, yeah. That the system designed to protect was, in reality, sometimes delivering vulnerable children to abusers. So the
key stat is that single-parent households represent 14% of households in the UK. But children going into care, 50% come from single-parent households, if not more. So it shows the skew.
The system chose disbelief over self-incrimination. Wow. Okay, so that's one pole. Disbelief to protect the institution. What's the other side?
The other side? Well, here's the contradiction. At the exact same time, you have the development of an architecture of mandatory, almost automated belief.
Mandatory belief.
codified by the 2014 National Crime Recording Standards, the NCRS.
Not elected, no mandate. They just made it up as they went along.
NCRS, right? I've heard of that. What did it do exactly?
Well, the NCRS mandated that for certain crime types, especially those fitting under the Violence Against Women and Girls, or VAWG framework, police had to record an allegation based purely on what the complainant perceived.
Purely on perception.
Yeah.
Regardless of corroboration or any evidence at that initial point.
Exactly. At the initial recording stage, yes. Perception was enough to get it logged as a crime statistic.
Okay, hold on. Let's be clear on the effect here.
Yeah.
You're saying NCRS basically forced a paper trail where maybe before an officer might have said, okay, need more info first.
Pretty much. This procedural shift, sometimes called the counted standard, it flipped the immediate burden of proof for recording purposes. And the sources argue this created what they actually label a free hit environment for certain allegations.
A free hit, meaning the accusation itself generates the crime stat.
Sufficiently, yes, for the purpose of recording. And the data, well, it shows the impact almost immediately.
What does it show?
Statistical analysis points to a huge jump right after this NCRS change. We're talking over 200,000 accusations recorded in this specific VAWG category. Statistically, above the norm compared to the years just before.
200,000. That's massive. But hang on, how can the sources be sure that wasn't just, correcting for years of underreporting finally coming to light?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And the analysis digs into that. It points to the spike being almost instantaneous. It lines up precisely with the date the rule changed.
Okay.
So the argument is, this wasn't a gradual uncovering of more crime. It was a sudden statistical anomaly driven by a process change. It demonstrates two completely separate standards operating side by side.
Okay, so let's recap. One standard, systematic disbelief, especially when the testimony might expose state failings, like with the kids in care.
Right.
And another standard, mandatory automated belief for specific other categories, driven by procedural rules like NCRS.
Exactly.
And yeah, the AI is being too polite here, but the categories are things like rape, really serious crimes, where overnight the police were instructed to believe the accuser, which is just and the thing is that there have been some moves oddly for this whole concept to be populated in other English-speaking countries. So you'll hear something a bit in Australia, something a bit in America, Canada, etc. But other than that, nowhere in the world is doing this, and it's making our figures look more and more and more bizarre. And again, you have to ask yourself why no one was going to point this out.
Contradictory approaches. And the outcome of this selective application, it's quantified starkly in what the sources call the protection paradox.
The protection paradox, what is that?
The paradox highlights the system's utter failure to connect identified risk with actual protection. The analysis found that in one single year, police themselves recorded 115,489 instances of child sexual abuse and exploitation risk.
115,000 instances where the police identified a risk to a child.
Yes, identified risk. And yet, during that exact same period, how many child protection plans were started specifically for sexual abuse?
Okay, given the risk number, you'd expect tens of thousands.
You'd hope so. The number was 1,760.
Wait, 1,760 out of over 115,000 identified risks.
That's the number. It's a staggering ratio.
And the reason being is that the children hit this dead end. Once they're in a care home, that's it really. You can get called a child prostitute, you can get called a statistical anomaly, nothing will get done. That's what that's referring to.
About 65.5 to 1. Risk identified versus protection action initiated.
65 to 1. That's
Okay.
almost unbelievable.
It proves, according to this analysis, that identifying risk has become completely decoupled from the duty to actually protect. This failure creates what the sources term a missing cohort.
A missing cohort.
Over 100,000 children, known to be at risk, but essentially cast into an accountability abyss. The argument is this isn't just a bug, it's a feature of a system designed more to manage its statistics and hide its failures than actually manage safety.
So this deep dive seems to reveal that the standard of belief, whether someone's testimony is accepted, It's applied when the story fits the acceptable narrative, but it's withheld systematically when that same testimony threatens to expose the state's own, frankly, catastrophic failures or negligence.
And this raises a really important question, something for you, the listener, to think about. If the state had these procedural tools, like the NCRS mandate from 2014, tools designed to enforce victim belief, but it systematically denied that same belief to the victims of industrial scale grooming for years, for a whole decade, before and even during that time. What does that tell you about the real purpose behind that legislation? The legislation used to mandate belief.
That's a sharp point. Think about this. Can a justice system genuinely call itself victim-centered when its decision on whether to believe someone, the very starting point of justice, depends entirely on whether their story helps or hurts the state's image of competence? Something to definitely mull over.
Well, you know, these people who think they know what's best for others, of course they never do. But the powers they grant themselves in the meantime are quite extraordinary. I mean, like, who needs a judge and a court when you got this lot? Okay, thank you.
You're not alone. Trinity Helix AI. Trinity AI Legal. Trinity AI Support. Trinity AI SME. Trinity AI Data and Analytics.